This is our first podcast so far. Today we'll be one of the topics we'll be talking about will be about war, the possibility of World War III, how one should behave in war, and the Geneva Convention. My name is Kevin. I'm the editor of the Scribe, and with me here is Brian Woolite. He is one of our contributing writers.
You know me. By now. Yeah. Well, yeah. This topic is going to be a little bit lighter. A little bit heavier
than our last two.
Which is usually, it's not a bad thing, I guess. It's got to mix it up, Oh yeah, World War III. I think, honestly, I really do think it's approaching fast with ISIS, getting everyone in a tizzy. Everyone's sort of involved with ISIS at this point. Everyone in the Middle East. I think Japan wants to get involved with ISIS. Of course, the West is sort of pussyfooting around the whole thing. They're like, oh, should we do it? And you have Obama begging Congress to go to war. And, Congress, since they never do anything anyway, sort of just, thinking it over.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is a pretty odd matter, in many ways.
Yeah.
For starters, what Obama said, the declaration that he made and what he was asking Congress to sign, I read it, and I can see some of the worries in it, in that it said they would pursue ISIS, to wherever it went, which means that if, you can say you're going to be striking ISIS in Egypt, but if ISIS retreats and goes into Nigeria, for example, then you've authorized, the U.S. military to go into Nigeria, occupy it, and try and fight ISIS there. So it's a thing that, is very dependent on whether or not we can actually eliminate them and where we eliminate them.
Exactly.
Because if they keep retreating, we're just going to go further and further into it, and also reoccupying other countries.
And occupying other countries in the first place is like a mixed bag. It's like a double-edged sword. You occupy them to try to help them fight like extremists, but then they get angry because you probably did something that destroyed their economy or destroyed a landmark. So now you've got, now you're fighting a war on two fronts. Now you got two people mad at you: the country you're occupying and the people you're trying to fight in the first place.
Yeah, there's definitely been cases in history where that has happened. Now, the president's declaration and asking Congress to declare war against ISIS has brought up all sorts of different debates. One thing that had recently come up back in February 16, I believe, is that Dr. Ben Carson, a potential 2016 GOP presidential candidate, had said that the U.S. military needs minimal oversight in order to be successful in its campaign against the Islamic State, as quoted by the Huffington Post. Essentially, the article goes on to say, it keeps quoting like some of the stuff he said during the interview, and essentially what he's saying is that there shouldn't be any, that war is messy, war is going to be terrible, and it's going to involve death, and he does not believe that there should be, any rules for it. He says either have no war or just don't try to say what you can and cannot do.
The thing is, war is sort of one of those unavoidable evils. There's always going to be someone that is willing to take on a bigger or weaker country or force. There's always going to be some sort of war going on. So the rules that are in place is to make sure that we punish those that break the rules of war, so that maybe in the future people actually follow the rules.
Yeah, and we have to remember that rules for war weren't exactly a very common thing.
Yeah.
Especially the rules for war really came into place after World War II with the introduction of 4 different Geneva Conventions, in which they tried to, as a global, force, and with global cooperation, they tried to come up with a set of rules on how to behave in war to avoid completely destroying the environment for both parties, and also, avoid any action that could be seen as inhumane,
Yeah.
such as, for example, one famous case would be like the way Japan during World War II had attacked China and went so far as to violate and murder a lot of the civilians.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they weren't even, and there's not even members of the army. They just literally ransacked a village and just had absolutely no one was controlling them. They just did as they wished.
That's sort of the thing that the rules are trying to punish.
Yeah.
Like they're not trying to punish the soldier that accidentally let off a clip on a civilian. That's not what they're trying to punish. They're actively trying to punish inhumane acts, which is humiliation of a civilian or torture. Things like that. Now, I understand that essentially that's idealistic. That really is. How are you going to prevent every inhumane act that happens, especially during the war where people need information and torture has always been a thing. Even the US can't not resort to those kinds of actions. But it's the rules are there to make sure to punish those that do those actions. And to hopefully what's that called? What's that word I'm looking for? It's to prevent by setting an example. I forgot what it's called. Never mind. But yeah, it's they're there for a reason. They're not there just to scare soldiers into not fighting.
Oh, definitely.
Soldiers are going to fight. Regardless.
Yeah, and what we have to remember is that the Geneva Convention is not looking to prevent war. As you said, it's looking to prevent inhumane acts. So, people are going to go to war anyway. What we're trying to do is trying to have them, if they're going to go to war, to kind of to behave in a humane manner, meaning that they don't do something like the U.S. did during World War II and drop a couple nuclear bombs on Japan.
Only a few.
Just drop a couple of nuclear bombs and kill millions of innocent civilians.
Yeah.
They were not even fighting the army at that point. They were just killing actual innocent civilians. And so that's essentially what it's trying to do. It's trying to prevent countries from going to war and behaving in a very destructive, dangerous manner. Especially when it comes to the ways that they behave and the things that they use. Nuclear bombs is definitely one of them. Biochemical weapons, poison gas.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely on the list of things they cannot use. They also have, if I remember correctly, the Geneva Convention also protects against the use of weapons with 3 edges, primarily because the reason why they allow bladed weapons with only 2 edges is because even though it can kill a person, the kind of cut that it makes can be stitched up, and so the person has a chance of survival, regardless of how low it is.
Yeah.
When you use a 3-bladed weapon, it literally punches a hole through the person's body that cannot be stitched up. So that person has, you're using weapons that are guaranteed to kill. The person has no chance of survival. And so it wouldn't matter how many doctors you have, you're not going to be able to save that person. And that's one of the things that they're trying to do. They're trying to prevent it from becoming a pure, bloodbath, from getting to just become a massive graveyard.
A pure desolation sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also there to set guidelines for just preventing mass genocide or anything like that. It's
that as well.
Everything that happened in World War II, according to the Geneva Convention, should never happen again.
Definitely not.
That should never happen again. That World War II was a minefield for atrocity, in both civilian populations and regular. Oh man.
And let's not forget that there's been several cases before the Geneva Convention came into place. There have been several ways, in which people as a culture had their own rules, especially when it comes to wars. But even then, it didn't fully dictate what they did. One example is, I have a couple examples from the U.S. at different times.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to World War One, for example,
Yeah.
they had snipers, but snipers were seen as cowardly because they were killing enemies from far away. Back
Still
then, the idea was still that if you want to really be a true soldier, you need to go face to face and kill your opponent that way, and that's what tested you to the point where once World War One was over, they fired all their snipers. They kept the regular army members, but they fired the snipers. So when World War II came along, they had no snipers
and
had to retrain them from scratch.
Exactly. And then they had to learn how to rush bunkers. They had to learn how to rush from the beaches. You don't have a sniper to watch your back, and
Definitely.
they're getting gunned down by machine gun nests. It was just it had to be terrifying.
And so that's one case in which rules do dictate to a certain extent what a country does during war. They still use snipers because they had to, but the fact that they fired the previous ones meant that they had no veterans in terms of sniping. So they had no one who could teach them, and they had to start all the way from scratch.
Yeah.
So you have very inexperienced snipers going out there into war
In the front lines.
in the front line.
Because they don't know how a sniper is supposed to operate.
Yeah, and then you have another example from the U.S. before that, during the Civil War, in which, they had ways of dealing with their enemies. They would fight them and everything as usual. But at this point, instead of following, the regular rules, they were looking to put an end to the war, and they wanted to do it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
To the point where you have a famous general, I forget his name, I think it was Sherman.
Sherman.
But I'm not, don't quote me on that.
Too late.
Essentially, they had a famous general who went out and, would try to fight the enemy. And he had a pretty sad loss record because the enemy was just in larger numbers and was, effectively defeating him.
Which side was this? Confederate or?
He was fighting for the North.
Oh, okay.
And was fighting against the Confederates.
All right.
Now, at some point, he decided to stop playing by the rules, essentially. And what he did was, he followed the scorched earth policy. Which means that everywhere he went, he would burn the crops. He would destroy, buildings and everything. And keep moving there so that retreating enemies or enemies that are following them would run out of supplies and resources. To the point that when they caught up to them, they would be weakened, they would be exhausted, and that general and his army and his section of the army could go in and defeat them, despite the fact that they had larger numbers.
Scorched earth.
Yeah, so he basically went to the point of destroying the environment to obtain victory, and he did. He actually did. Once he started using that, there was almost no battle that he lost. He had an impressive, winning streak after that.
Why is that strategy so broken, man? Russia uses it every time someone comes in during the winter. They use it every time, and they win every time. What about that strategy is so effective? I don't know, man.
Yeah. So to be fair, Russia uses it on its own people, not on the enemy.
Oh, okay.
Back when Napoleon, back when the French Empire was in place and Napoleon tried to attack Russia, Napoleon tried to go straight into the capital, and by the time they got there, they found that Russia had actually burnt down the capital and all the supplies.
Okay.
Forcing Napoleon's men to retreat back to France with the limited supplies that they had, and they couldn't get any more. To the point where more than a quarter of his troops, or maybe even half, died on the trip back. So his army was, pretty much decimated.
Yeah.
Well, it was halved. And essentially, Napoleon lost a lot of people. Scorched earth policy is very effective.
Yeah.
Also very destructive.
Yeah.
It has been in place for quite a long time. It's got roots all the way back to colonial times, definitely.
There's not much earth in Russia, though, is there? I mean, it's more like tundra. Yeah.
But yeah, the scorched earth policy, it was applied in Russia. It just comes from like destroying the environment, destroying the crops and everything.
I said tundra. I'm balling.
Well, parts of Russia has tundra.
Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of like that's the name it was given because that's the way it was originally working. But it gets whenever anyone does that in whatever environment they're in,
yeah,
it gets called the scorched earth policy. And so you have situations where, before the Geneva Convention, people would essentially do whatever it took for them to win, regardless of how bad that might be. Napoleon's troops, they were in Russia during the winter. The temperatures were far below 0 degrees. They did not have the proper equipment to, do that. A lot of them suffered from frostbite. Some had to amputate some of their limbs. Plenty lost their lives. So, he was smart. When they did that, when they destroyed Moscow essentially and used that against Napoleon and his forces, they did an extremely decisive blow and just left them with nothing. They left them to their own devices out in the middle of the snow in the winter, with very few available resources.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a cold. Well, I had a cold a few days ago, so it's still kind of lingering.
So yeah, that goes to show you just how far war can go to, where both using that during the Civil War, using that against Napoleon, using that in many other places that they've done it.
Yeah.
It is extremely effective, but it is also inhumane because you're not only cutting off the supplies and resources for the enemies that are coming in, you're also cutting that for the civilians that live in that area.
Okay. All right. I was wondering, would that be inhumane? I mean, it's a viable strategy.
The thing is that usually the application of the scorched earth policy is called that way because you also can't grow crops for quite some time.
Oh, okay.
So you're not only destroying them, you're essentially I forget exactly how long, but I would say probably a few years.
A few years, yeah.
Like 4 or 5 years before you can start using that ground again. So anyone who's there is not going to be able to grow crops again.
Okay.
For quite some time. So, you're really limiting what they can do with it.
Right. Oh, no.
And so, I believe another one, I think I remember a similar strategy to that in which what they would do is kind of like use salt on the ground.
Oh, yeah, salting the ground so that nothing can grow there.
Definitely.
I think that's the longer effect, though, than scorching the earth. That's way longer, if I remember correctly. That's used for, I think that would be mostly used if, they found the enemy base or enemy supply depot, and then they just fucking go to town with it. Yeah. I imagine spies would use that the most, or something like that.
So you have, several cases with it where, having no rules is dangerous.
No rules! Put your shirt back on.
There's one rule. And so you have that. Now, if I remember correctly, we were told recently that Japan was looking to try and undo some of the terms of its treaty to be able to get its army back.
Yeah.
And, there are pros and cons to that.
Oh.
Obviously, we can't look at them all, but a couple of the other ones that we can look to is, one of the cons is the fact that, Japan hasn't really given up, at least the government hasn't really given up its dreams of imperialism. They do still have that in their constitution, it is possible that they could build up to try and, grow once more. However, what we also have to remember is that Japan currently only has a defense force. And you might think that that's, a pretty effective one, especially with the UN in place and everything. But what we have to remember is that the League of Nations, which is the UN's predecessor, was there after World War I. And they also had similar rules for both Germany and, some other countries. Germany still built up its army in spite of the League of Nations telling them not to. And then one of the major problems with that was that when it came to the Rhineland and when it came to invading France, that was extremely easy for Hitler to accomplish because they had little to no forces And it's because they did not have an army. They essentially just had a defense force.
But most of that you could sort of blame on appeasement, though, because like they just like Germany was like, okay, we won't do it anymore. We just did it again, and they're like, don't do it again, please. And they're like, yeah, we won't do it anymore. Let's just do this. You know, it's
Definitely.
I don't think we have that issue of appeasement anymore in the modern world. You know.
No, we don't. But it's like.
Well, I mean, unless ISIS.
Yeah, but it's like at the same time, it's an example of what can happen if you actually choose like not to let someone build out the army. France. The conditions for France was that some of the other city-states and smaller nations around it were supposed to have an army to be able to protect it from an attack, but none of them had a strong enough defense force to fend off Hitler's army. And then because of that, France had almost nothing to defend itself with, which made it extremely easy for Hitler to just take it over. And so, that's one of the issues that we have, because despite the rules, despite international committees and everything, someone's eventually gonna try and start to go to war. If we leave people vulnerable to their attack, even if the enemy is overwhelming, as long as these people have some kind of force to defend themselves with, and something that's stronger than just the regular defense force.
Yeah.
Because that's more like a National Guard kind of stands for it.
Yeah, boats, no tanks. Basically. Yeah.
So it's like, they need to have something better than that to at least try and fend off some of it. Even if the enemy overwhelms them and just captures them anyway, the enemy is not as simple as the enemy just walking into the place and taking it over that quickly.
That's the reasoning that Japan's actually using it. Like they stated something about wanting to help quell the ISIS threat or something, right? So that's one of the reasoning. That's the reasoning that they're using for wanting their defense force back. They want to help push back ISIS, which of course is something everyone wants to do. Jordan bombed everything in response to ISIS.
Especially, Egypt went pretty far. I believe after the 32 Egyptians were killed by ISIS, I think in Jordan. The Egypt president, I believe, the Egyptian president essentially called for a number of airstrikes to be carried out against ISIS.
All of the airstrikes.
Speaking of which, France is actually getting back into the airstrike business.
Oh, finally.
France is starting.
When's the last time you heard that France ever did anything army related? It's been
Napoleon.
a while. God damn it.
I just said it about.
You just said all.
But yeah, France was getting back into it. I remember reading a few years ago, probably a couple years ago, about some other, it was a cooperative airstrike done by U.S., Canada, I think, some Arab countries, some Middle Eastern countries, and the UK and France. And it's it gave you the exact number. I don't have it with me right now, but if I remember correctly, France had the most of them by a lot.
Okay.
France delivered a large number of airstrikes.
All right.
So France has been starting to get heavily involved with it.
We were just underestimating France now.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like a butt. I feel like I'm just missing out on a lot. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to talk about these things because I don't really read up that much on world news. I know a lot. I think I know a fair amount of history about what happened in the past, but I'm not really that savvy into what goes on in the world as we know it. The extent of my knowledge is that ISIS is messing everything up. Everyone's seeing how ISIS is messing everything up. So much so that it's actually causing some sort of weird union in the Middle East that hasn't been seen in a long time. And that Japan wants its offense force and wants to show off at least one Gundam before the end of 2017. That's the extent of my knowledge of world news right now. And that's kind of ignorant, but I mean, like, what I have to go on is Vice, like image boards, people that talk about these sort of things like in their free time that know a lot more than I do. That's something I could admit. I'm not that savvy about world news,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
You have a lot of situations of a lot of things going down, around the world recently, and it is getting to the point where, you see a lot of chaos, a lot of people fighting both each other and the government and like other military forces, and it does really seem as though World War III is possible.
Oh yeah,
But granted, the League of Nations was put into place to prevent World War II, and the UN was put in place to prevent World War III. So essentially, if World War III happens, it means that we have to really think things through, because both of the institutions that we set up to prevent this from ever happening again failed in their mission to prevent this from happening again. And a lot of it, is due to differing interests, different backgrounds, different histories, different opinions. Like, a lot of things can't be resolved easily. But that's one of the things that the UN was trying to recognize when it was built.
Yeah.
And is still trying to work on. If it fails in that, then it means that, we have to tackle it from a different perspective, because we can't put in the UN or an updated version of the UN and expect that to work if the UN itself couldn't work. Because it means that despite all the precautions and all the things that we did for in creating the UN to kind of prevent and just deal with different national conflicts and international conflicts, it's still not enough.
If it is shaping up to be a World War III, though, this one looks like it might be a smaller version, because there is only one enemy so far. Like, until someone goes like, oh, we support ISIS, and they happen to be a major country or maybe a smaller country with a lot of guns, then I think this would be like a smaller World War III, which probably wouldn't be as bad as World War II, but involves like every hemisphere. Like, is that what it needs to be considered a world war? If it involves the Western and the Eastern hemisphere, I'm not sure. Like,
no, I mean, I don't think it requires that. It just has to be I think what it has to do is kind of breach more than one continent. So it's like, you have Russia during World War I, for example. Russia was both part of Europe and part of Asia. So I think with Russia getting involved, it kind of starts going more into, the world, like, because you have like a couple different continents.
Okay.
And then once the U.S. and Japan came involved, like, you had even farther stretches getting involved into that.
Okay.
So I would essentially say that what makes it a world war is when it when it expands past the continent. Because you have had a lot of similar conflicts like that in Africa, for example, but it did not, it was not considered a world war.
Right.
Whether that's because historians just don't see much for the countries there, see like Europe as the more developed ones, and so they consider that a world war. I don't know. But I would say that it's probably just because of like what nations get involved and for how far.
I like to, yeah, all right, that makes sense. Yeah, I like to think that World War is like when, if every hemisphere, if this constitutes a world war, United States or North America is at war with another continent like Asia, and Europe is involved with it, and like that would probably constitute a world war, in my opinion.
I mean, that's exactly what constituted two. That's exactly what constituted two world wars. So.
Whatever.
North America.
North.
And Europe. And Asia.
South America.
No.
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 Okay. No.
South America has not been involved in any world wars.
Surprising. Kinda.
Not really. According to their history, they have had dictatorships and like some conflicting governments for quite some time. Probably around the time of, like, for some of them, the dictatorship ended around World War II, but at the same time, for some of them, it also a new one started.
Okay.
You had the same issue with Spain, which is why it was not involved in World War II, because I think in the early 1930s, that's when a new dictatorship showed up and took place, and was trying to quell revolutions and everything. And when it came to World War II, I believe he was still in power, but at the same time they were going through a famine. So there was no point in other nations trying to gain control of that because it was currently a mess and couldn't really focus too much on outside forces because his government was already kind of at odds with its own people. So if you think you can send in soldiers to fight elsewhere, you're gonna lose the ones protecting your authoritarian government from the people that want to take you out and want to remove you from power. And then after that, like after World War II and after the dictator was removed, at that point Spain was working on recovering from all the damage. And so, what you have is a lot in both of those cases, for World War I and World War II, a lot of countries just
they're too busy fighting their own.
Yeah, either had their own issues to work with, or simply did not have the resources or national interest to get involved.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Jesus, World War.
Yeah.
Talking about war today. Oh, it's too cold.
Gotta get prepared for Russia.
Oh.
Russia's gonna be involved.
It's been cold for like a week. I've had enough of it.
I'm sorry.
Feels like we're in Russia. There's abandoned buildings everywhere. There's a factory that never stops.
Well, see, now there's your problem. It cannot feel like we're in Russia because if it felt like we were in Russia, we would be in Russia. There is no in between. Either you're wearing 7 layers of clothing right now indoors with the windows closed,
with the
or
heater
you're
on.
outside getting frostbite.
Oh, that'll do it. Well, what do you want to do?
Well, this has been a pretty.
And this one, yeah.
Yeah, this has been a pretty good, conversation about war, the potential for World War III.
War.
Issues surrounding it.
Not enough Tesla tanks.
Tesla tanks?
Electric tanks.
No.
No.
I think that might fall under inhumane.
Would it?
You're disintegrating the enemy.
Inhumane, but cool as hell to look at.
I think you're violating the Geneva Convention.
Ah, crap. You know what? There should not be rules in war concerning the...
You're willing to go against the Geneva Convention just for electric tanks.
Have you seen a Tesla tank?
I have not seen the Tesla.
Play Command and Conquer Red Alert 2. Look at a mammoth tank and a Tesla tank and tell me that should not be in war.
I'll have to look at it to tell you right now that should not be in war.
That shouldn't be in war.
That should not be in war.
Probably shouldn't, should it?
It should not.
It probably shouldn't. Well,
this was a good show.
Yeah, hey, you know what? It was a pretty interesting talk. Hey, tune back in for the Brian and Kevin hour. Where we talk about...
Well, technically, this is only a half hour. And with that said, thank you all for listening. Have a good day, and we'll see you all next time.
See you, Phil.